The fuel leak had turned into a 3-day nightmare. David Reed crawled out from under his ship's starboard thruster, grease coating his hands and frustration weighing on his shoulders. The Wandering Star sat in Dock 17 of Port Havel, looking as tired as he felt. 43 years old and still fixing his own engines because hiring mechanics cost more than he could spare, he wiped his hands on a rag that was already beyond saving and walked around to check the cargo bay. The loading ramp hung open like a metal tongue, and something felt wrong. David had learned to trust his instincts during 12 years of military transport service. Those instincts had kept him breathing through situations that turned other pilots into debris. Inside the bay, crates stood stacked against the walls, waiting for tomorrow's run to the agricultural colonies. Everything looked normal until David noticed the tarp in the corner had been moved. Someone had dragged it over the fuel canisters and made a nest. He approached slowly, hand resting on the stunner at his belt. Pirates occasionally sent scouts to case cargo ships before hitting them in deep space. But when David pulled back the tarp, he found something entirely different. A child stared up at him with golden eyes that reflected the bay's harsh lighting. Amber scales covered her small frame, dulled by malnutrition and grime. One of her horns had broken off halfway, leaving a jagged stump. Her wings, folded tight against her back, showed burn scars that made David's stomach twist. She held something clutched to her chest. A photograph, creased and faded from constant handling. "I'm not going to hurt you," David said, keeping his voice level. He'd served alongside enough non-human soldiers to know that dragons could smell fear and aggression. "What's your name?" The hatchling didn't answer. She pressed herself further into the corner, but her eyes kept darting past David to the ship's interior, specifically to the cockpit where the control panels were visible through the open bulkhead door. David crouched down, making himself smaller and less threatening. "You can stay there if you want, but I got some food in the galley. Real food, not station scraps." Interested, still no response, but the hatchling's nostrils flared slightly. When had she last eaten? David stood slowly and walked to the galley, leaving the cargo bay door open. He pulled out a protein pack and some dried fruit, the good stuff he saved for long hauls. Then he set it on a crate near the bay entrance and retreated to the cockpit. He pretended to check his navigation systems while watching the cargo bay through the reflection in his console screen. After 5 minutes, the hatchling crept forward. She moved with the cautious grace of someone who'd learned that the world offered more kicks than kindness. She grabbed the food and retreated, but not quite as far as before. David gave her 10 minutes to eat. Then he heard the soft scrape of claws on metal decking. The hatchling had moved closer, standing just outside the cockpit entrance. She was staring at the control layout with an intensity that seemed too old for her young face. "My father once flew one like this," she whispered. Her voice came out rough, like she hadn't used it in a long time. David turned in his seat, careful not to make any sudden movements. Did he now? The hatchling held up the photograph. Even from a distance, David could see it showed a dragon in a pilot's uniform standing beside a ship that shared the Wandering Star's basic design. A Helix-class freighter, common enough in the outer rim colonies, but increasingly rare in the core systems. "Can I see that?" David asked. The hatchling hesitated, then stepped into the cockpit and handed him the photograph. Her claws clicked nervously against the deck plating. David examined the image carefully. The dragon in the pilot's uniform wore the commercial freight insignia, and behind him the ship bore markings that made David's breath catch in his throat. "What was your father's name?" he asked quietly. "Commander Tavis. He flew the Meridian Light on the outer routes." The hatchling's voice dropped even lower. "He disappeared 3 years ago, near the Veil Nebula." David's hands tightened on the photograph. The Veil Nebula. He knew that name, knew it in his bones and his nightmares. 12 freighters had entered that swirling mass of cosmic gas and radiation. Only 3 had come out, and David had been piloting one of them. The rest were declared lost with all hands, victims of a pirate ambush that had torn through the convoy like a plasma cutter through sheet metal. But David had always suspected there was more to the story. The attack patterns had been wrong, too coordinated for random pirates. And something else had been in that nebula, something that had made his threat indicators scream warnings his conscious mind still couldn't interpret. "What's your name?" David asked. "Kia. I'm David. Captain David Reed." He handed the photograph back carefully. "How long have you been living in my cargo bay, Kira?" "For days. Before that, I was in the recycling station. Before that, the ventilation tunnels near the lower docks." She clutched the photograph to her chest again. "A move when security finds me." As if summoned by the mention, heavy boots rang against the dock outside. Two security officers appeared at the cargo bay entrance, hands resting on shock batons. The older one, a human with scars across his jaw, pointed at Kira. "There's the vagrant. We've been tracking her for weeks. She's been stealing from cargo holds across the station." David stood up and moved between the officers and Kira. "She's not a vagrant. She's my crew." The officer laughed. "Your crew? Captain, that's a homeless dragon hatchling. She doesn't have registration, doesn't have a guardian, doesn't have any right to be on this station. We're taking her to processing." "No," David said. The word came out flat and final. "You're not." The officer's hand tightened on his baton. "Don't make this difficult, Captain. We have regulations." "So do I. Regulation 47 of the Outer Colonies Shipping Code states that a ship's captain has full authority over their crew and cargo while docked. This hatchling is now part of my crew, which means she's under my authority, not yours." David crossed his arms. "You want to challenge that? We could go see the dockmaster. I've got my union rep on speed dial, and I promise you, this will turn into a paperwork nightmare that your supervisor won't appreciate." The officers exchanged glances. The younger one, a Centauri with blue skin, shook his head slightly. They weren't paid enough to fight regulations and union reps over one homeless hatchling. "Fine," the older officer said. "But you're responsible for her, Captain. Any trouble she causes falls on you." "Understood." The officers left, their boots echoing away into the noise of the busy port. David turned back to find Kira staring at him with those golden eyes, now wide with something that might have been hope or might have been disbelief. "Why did you do that?" she asked. David looked at the photograph she still clutched, at the ship that looked so much like his own, at the dragon who had flown into the Veil and never returned. He thought about the screams over the comm channels that night, about the ships that had scattered when he gave the order to break formation and run, about the guilt that woke him up at 0300 with his heart pounding. "Because your father flew a ship like mine," David said, "and because I think I owe him something." Kira ate like someone who expected the food to disappear at any moment. David sat across from her in the galley, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he watched her demolish 2 more protein packs and a container of preserved vegetables. Her claws scraped against the metal plate, and occasionally she paused to glance up at him as if confirming he was really going to let her finish. "When did you last have a real meal?" David asked. Kira swallowed and thought about it. 6 days. Maybe 7. A dock worker gave me half a sandwich. 7 days. David felt something tighten in his chest. He'd gone hungry during the war. Everyone had on those long patrols between supply runs, but he'd been a trained soldier. Kira was just a kid. "Tell me about your father," he said gently. Kira's claws stopped moving. She set down the plate and pulled out the photograph again, smoothing it against the table with careful reverence. "He flew freight for the Colonial Supply Network, mostly agricultural equipment and building materials to the outer settlements. He said it was honest work, helping people build new lives far from the crowded core worlds." "Was it just him on the ship?" "No, there were 4 crew members, and passengers, sometimes families moving to the colonies." Kira traced a claw along the edge of the photograph. 3 years ago, he took a contract to run supplies through the Veil Nebula. The route was supposed to be faster, save 2 weeks of travel time. He kissed me goodbye at Port Havel, right here on this station, and said he'd bring me back a crystal from the nebula's edge. He never came home. David knew the rest of the story, but he needed to hear her version. "What did the authorities tell you?" "That his ship was lost in a pirate attack, that there were no survivors, that I should move on with my life." Bitterness crept into Kira's voice, sharp and painful for someone so young. "They gave my mother a small insurance payment. It wasn't enough. She tried to work, tried to keep us going, but the medical bills for my injuries were too much. She got sick, really sick. The free clinic couldn't help her, and we couldn't afford the good hospitals. She died 8 months after my father disappeared. David closed his eyes briefly. In the outer colonies, tragedy came in waves. One loss triggered another, and suddenly a family was gone, scattered to the winds or buried in unmarked graves. The core worlds had safety nets, social programs, resources. Out here, you had what you could earn and nothing more. The burns on your wings, he said. Were you on the ship with your father? Kira nodded slowly. I don't remember much. Just flashes, fire and alarms, and my father shouting orders. Someone put me in something cold and dark. Then nothing until I woke up in a hospital on Thesha 9. They said a rescue beacon brought a patrol ship to my location, but they never found my father or the rest of the crew. Just me, floating in an emergency pod. David leaned forward. Kira, I was there, in the Veil Nebula. I was part of that convoy. Her eyes went wide. You were? I commanded a transport called the Winter's Break. We were carrying medical supplies and prefab housing units. 12 ships went into that nebula together. We thought there was safety in numbers. David's hands tightened around his coffee cup. We were wrong. The memories came back sharp and clear. The Veil Nebula had been beautiful and terrible, swirling clouds of purple and crimson that played havoc with sensors. Navigation required manual piloting, relying on visual markers and instinct. The convoy had been strung out in a loose formation, each captain focused on not losing sight of the ship ahead. Then the first explosion had torn through the comm channels. Pirates! Someone had screamed, but David had known immediately it wasn't right. Pirates hit fast and ran faster, grabbing what they could and disappearing before military response could arrive. These attackers had been methodical, targeting engines first to cripple ships, then systematically destroying escape pods. I gave the order to scatter, David said quietly. As convoy leader, I should have kept us together, should have organized a defense. But the attack was too coordinated, too professional. I knew if we stayed in formation, we'd all die. So I told everyone to run, to use the nebula's interference to hide and find their own way out. What happened then? Chaos. Some ships tried to jump immediately and got caught by the nebula's gravity wells. Their drives tore themselves apart. Others scattered into the clouds like I ordered. I saw 3 ships get hit by weapons fire that looked wrong, too clean and precise for pirate gear. Then my own sensors went haywire, and I focused on getting my crew out alive. David met Kira's eyes. We emerged from the nebula 2 days later, half our fuel gone and our hull scarred from debris impacts. 2 other ships made it out. The rest were declared lost. Officially, pirates killed them all. But I've never believed that. Why not? Because pirates don't carry military-grade plasma cannons. Because pirates don't execute escape pods. Because the whole attack felt like an extermination, not a robbery. David pulled out his personal datapad and called up old shipping records. I've been quietly investigating for 3 years, whenever I have time between cargo runs. I found inconsistencies, things that don't add up. He showed Kira the screen. Every ship in that convoy was insured by the same company, Orin Holdings. They paid out the claims within a month, no investigation, no questions asked. That's unusual. Insurance companies normally drag their feet, look for any excuse to deny payment. But Orin just handed over millions of credits and closed the files. Kira studied the data, her young face serious. You think the insurance company was involved? I think someone wanted that convoy dead, and I think they had the resources to make it happen and cover it up. David scrolled through more files. I also think your father might have survived longer than the official reports claim. What do you mean? David pulled up a salvage report from 4 months after the incident. An independent salvage crew found wreckage near the nebula's edge. One of the pieces had a partial identification code. It matched the Meridian Light's stern section. But the interesting part is the location. It was 20,000 kilometers from where the main battle happened, on a trajectory that suggests someone piloted it there deliberately. My father. Maybe. If he was hurt but conscious. If his ship was dying but still had maneuvering thrusters. he might have tried to reach a safe zone. The question is, did he succeed? And if he did, what happened after? Kira's claws scraped against the table, a nervous gesture that betrayed her hope. Can we find out? David looked at this homeless hatchling, this survivor of something terrible that had also haunted him for 3 years. He thought about his cargo contracts, the money he needed to keep his ship running, the safe and sensible path that would keep him alive and solve it. Then he thought about the screams over the comm channels, about the ships that had trusted his leadership and died anyway, about the guilt that had eaten at him every single day since. Yes, he said, we could try. But Kira, you need to understand something. If we go looking for answers, we might find things that are dangerous. There are people who don't want the truth about the Veil to come out. They might come after us. I don't care, Kira said immediately. I need to know what happened to my father. David nodded slowly. He'd expected that answer. In her position, he would have said the same thing. All right then. First thing tomorrow, we're going to the registration office. I'm officially making you part of my crew. That means you get a bunk, meals, and protection under shipping guild regulations. Then we're going to delay my cargo run and start asking questions. He stood up and extended his hand. Deal. Kira looked at his hand for a moment, then carefully placed her smaller claw in his palm. Her scales felt warm and dry, and her grip was surprisingly strong. Deal, she said. Outside the ship, Port Havel continued its endless cycle of arrivals and departures. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the Veil Nebula waited with its secrets and its ghosts. David hoped they were ready for what they might find. The registration office smelled like recycled air and bureaucratic indifference. David filled out the crew manifest paperwork while Kira sat beside him, trying to look older than her age. The clerk, a tired-looking human woman with gray, streaking her hair, peered over her glasses at the forms. You're registering a dragon hatchling as crew? She asked, skepticism dripping from every word. That's correct, David said calmly. He dealt with worse than skeptical clerks during his military service. She doesn't have a guardian listed. No family registration. No educacional certificates. The clerk tapped her screen. According to station records, she's been flagged as a vagrant. She has a guardian now. Me. As ship's captain, I'm taking legal responsibility for her under Colonial Merchant Code Section 12, Paragraph 6. A captain may designate any individual as crew regardless of age or species, provided they receive appropriate training and care. The clerk frowned. That regulation is meant for family members joining family-owned ships. The regulation doesn't specify family members. It says any individual. David kept his voice pleasant but firm. I've included the educational plan here. Kira will receive navigation training, basic ship systems operation, and standard safety certification. All requirements met. The clerk looked at Kira, who sat very still with her claws folded in her lap. This is highly irregular. Irregular isn't illegal, David said. I've completed all the required forms, paid the registration fee, and provided documentation of the ship's safety standards. Unless you can cite a specific regulation that prevents this registration, I'd appreciate you processing the paperwork. The standoff lasted another 10 minutes, with the clerk calling her supervisor, who called the legal department, who finally confirmed that David was technically correct. The registration went through, and Kira became an official member of the Wandering Stars crew. Outside the office, Kira looked up at David with something like awe. You really know all those regulations? Learned them the hard way during my military years. Bureaucracy runs on rules, and if you know the rules better than they do, you can make things happen. David handed her the crew identification card. Keep this safe. It means you're not homeless anymore. Your crew. Kira clutched the card like it was made of precious metal. Thank you. Thank me by learning how to actually be useful on the ship. Come on, we got work to do. Back aboard the Wandering Star, David started teaching Kira the basics of ship operations. He'd expected to go slowly, to explain everything multiple times the way he'd had to with some of his military recruits. Instead, Kira absorbed information like a sponge, soaking up water. This panel controls environmental systems, David explained, pointing to a console in the engine room. Temperature, air pressure, oxygen mixture. You need to check it twice per shift. Kira studied the readouts. The oxygen levels are 0.3% below optimal. The scrubbers need maintenance. David blinked. How did you know that? The indicator light is amber instead of green, and the flow rate number is lower than the baseline shown here. She pointed to the small reference chart on the panel's edge. She was right. David had planned to service the scrubbers next week, but apparently Kira could read system diagnostics without even being told what to look for. Over the next few hours, she demonstrated the same intuitive understanding of navigation plots, fuel consumption calculations, and power distribution. Your father taught you this? David asked as they stood in the cockpit, reviewing star charts. Some of it, but mostly it just makes sense. Kira traced a route through the holographic display. See how this shipping lane curves around the gravity well? That's the most efficient path, using the planet's pull to save fuel instead of fighting it. She was describing advanced orbital mechanics like it was simple arithmetic. David had seen natural pilots before, people who understood spatial relationships in ways that couldn't really be taught. Kira had that gift in abundance, probably inherited from her father. While Kira explored the ship systems, David started making calls. His old military contacts were scattered across the outer colonies, some still in service, others retired or working private security. He reached out carefully, asking casual questions about the Veil incident, about shipping routes and insurance claims and corporate security forces. The response that came back from a former intelligence officer named Patricia hit like a railgun round. "Stop asking about the Veil," her message said. "Seriously, David, drop it. That incident is classified under corporate security protocols. People who poke into it tend to have accidents or lose their shipping licenses. If you value your career and your life, forget you ever heard of that nebula." David deleted the message and sat back in his chair. Patricia wasn't the type to scare easily. If she was warning him off, then the situation was worse than he'd thought. But knowing danger existed had never stopped him before, and it wouldn't stop him now. That evening, as David worked on the fuel leak repairs, Kira had another nightmare. He heard her cry out from the small cabin he'd assigned her, a sound of pure terror that cut through the ship's ambient noise. He found her huddled in the corner, wings wrapped around herself, trembling. "It's okay," David said quietly from the doorway. "You're safe. You're on the Wandering Star." Kira's breathing came in short gasps. "I dreamed about fire, about my father shouting, about something hitting the ship over and over. Memories? I think so, but they're all mixed up like puzzle pieces that don't fit together." She looked up at him with those golden eyes, now wet with tears. "Why can't I remember clearly? Why is it all just flashes and sounds?" David sat down against the wall, giving her space. "Trauma does that. Your mind protected you from the full horror by fragmenting the memories. It's normal, even if it doesn't feel that way." "Do you have nightmares?" "About the Veil." "Yeah," David admitted. "I dream about the ships I couldn't save, about the calls for help that got cut off mid-sentence, about the decision I made to scatter the convoy." He was quiet for a moment. "Guilt is a heavy thing to carry. My father would have followed your order," Kira said softly. "If you told the convoy to scatter, he would have done it. He believed in following chain of command. He told me that once, that good crews trust their leaders even in chaos. I hope he was right to trust me." Kira unfolded her wings slightly, the scarred membrane catching the cabin's dim light. "You saved your crew. You made it out. That means your decision was right." David wished he could believe that as simply as she said it. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start preparing for a trip to the Veil. I'm going to show you advanced navigation techniques. We're really going there. We're really going. But Kira, when we get there, things might get dangerous. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. No questions, no hesitation." "Understood. Understood, Captain." The title surprised him, but it felt right somehow. He stood up and moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have a visitor. A dragon dock worker named Ordhan approached me earlier. He said he has information about the Veil, but he'll only talk to both of us together." "Why both of us?" "I don't know yet, but he seemed nervous, like whatever he knows is dangerous." David looked back at her. "Are you sure you want to go down this path? Once we start pulling on these threads, we might unravel something we can't put back together." Kira's expression hardened with a determination that looked strange on her young face. My father is out there somewhere, alive or dead. I need to know which. Whatever the risk, I'll take it. David recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough, usually right before he did something brave or stupid or both. All right then, he said. We'll hear what Ordhan has to say, and then we'll make our plans. He left Kira to her rest and returned to the cockpit, where he pulled up star charts of the Veil Nebula. The swirling mass of gas and radiation looked deceptively beautiful on the screens, like a cosmic painting done in purples and crimsons. But David knew what lurked in that beauty. Somewhere in those clouds were answers, and probably danger. He began plotting a course that would take them into the nebula while avoiding known patrol routes. If Orin Holdings was really monitoring the area, he needed to approach carefully and quietly. The wandering star wasn't a military vessel, but she was small and could slip through sensor nets if piloted well. Beside the navigation console, the photograph of Kira's father sat where she'd left it earlier. The dragon in the pilot's uniform stared out at nothing, frozen in a moment of pride and hope that had been taken from him in fire and violence. I'm coming to find out what happened to you, David said quietly to the image. And if there's any justice left in this galaxy, someone's going to pay for what they did to that convoy. Outside the ship, Port Havel prepared for its night cycle, dimming lights and reducing traffic. But aboard the wandering star, preparations for a very different kind of journey had already begun. Ordhan arrived exactly when he said he would, slipping through the cargo bay door like a shadow, given form. The dragon was older than Kira's father had been in the photograph, his dark green scales marked with scars from a life spent in rough work. One eye was clouded with old damage, and he moved with the careful gait of someone whose body had absorbed too much punishment over the years. Captain Reed, he said, his voice a low rumble. And young Kira, thank you for seeing me. David gestured to the crates he'd arranged as makeshift seats. You said you had information about the Veil. Ordhan settled onto a crate with a grunt. I worked salvage runs for 15 years before my injury forced me into dock labor. About 6 months after the Veil incident, my old crew got a contract from a private buyer. Very private. They wanted us to retrieve specific debris from the nebula's edge, but we weren't supposed to report what we found. What did you find? Kira asked, leaning forward. 3 things that didn't match the official story. First, we found weapons signatures on the wreckage that were military grade, not pirate gear. Plasma cannons that cost more than most pirates could afford in a lifetime. Second, we found pieces of 4 ships, not the 9 that were supposedly destroyed. The math didn't add up. David felt his suspicions crystallizing into certainty. And the third thing? Ordhan pulled a data chip from his pocket, worn and scratched from age. We found an active beacon, a survival beacon, still transmitting on emergency frequencies. When we tracked it down, we discovered a debris field that included life pod components. Someone had survived long enough to deploy pods and program them for low-power mode to extend their operational time. Where? Kira's claws dug into the crate she sat on. Coordinates are on this chip, but here's what you need to understand. Our buyer, the one who hired us for that salvage run, was a shell corporation owned by Orn Holdings. They paid us triple the normal rate to recover that debris and then destroy our sensor logs. My captain took the deal. Most of the crew did, but I kept a backup. Ordhan held out the data chip. I've carried this for 3 years, wondering what to do with it. Then I heard about a human captain who took in a homeless dragon, Hatchling, and stood up to station security for her. That kind of stubbornness, that kind of loyalty, it reminded me why I went into salvage in the first place. To help people, not cover up their murders. David took the chip carefully. Why wait 3 years? Because Orn Holdings has people everywhere. Security forces, corporate lawyers, politicians who owe them favors. If I'd gone public, I would have disappeared and no one would have cared about an old salvage worker's conspiracy theories. Orthan's good, I fixed on David. But you're military. You have contacts, credibility, and most importantly, you're crazy enough to actually go into the Veil and look for evidence. You think there's still evidence to find. I think Orin covered up mass murder, and I think they left survivors to die because retrieving them would have raised questions. If those life pods maintained low power mode, they might have stayed operational for weeks, long enough for someone to reach them, if they'd bothered to look. Orhan stood up slowly. I'm too old and too broken to be a hero, Captain. But maybe you're not. He moved toward the cargo bay exit, then paused and looked back at Kira. Your father flew with honor, little one. I checked the manifests after I heard your story. Commander Tavis had a reputation as one of the best navigators in the outer colonies. Whatever happened in that nebula, he would have fought to protect his crew and passengers with everything he had. After Ordhan left, David and Kira stood in the cargo bay, the weight of the data chip heavy in David's hand. The decision point had arrived. They could turn this information over to authorities and hope for justice through official channels. Or they could take the risk and investigate themselves. We go to the Veil, Kira said, as if reading his thoughts. It's dangerous. More dangerous than I initially thought. If Orin Holdings really did stage that attack, they'll have security watching the area. They might even have people monitoring who ask questions about the incident. Then we'll be careful. Kira's determination hadn't wavered. But we have to go. Those coordinates might lead to my father. David nodded. He'd known what her answer would be. More importantly, he'd known what his own answer would be from the moment Ordhan mentioned survivors. The military had taught him many things, but the most important lesson was this. You never left people behind if there was even the slightest chance they were still alive. The Wandering Star departed Port Havel 2 days later, officially bound for an agricultural colony with a cargo of mining equipment. The manifest was legitimate enough to pass casual inspection, though David had delayed delivery by 3 weeks. His contact at the colony owed him favors and agreed to the extension without too many questions. Kira proved to be an exceptional navigator. As they approached the Veil Nebula, she plotted courses through gravitational anomalies that David's instruments could barely detect. Her spatial awareness allowed her to see paths that would have taken him hours to calculate. How are you doing this? He asked, watching her guide them through a particularly tricky series of micro-adjustments. I don't know. It's like I can feel the shape of space, the way gravity pulls and pushes. Kira's claws danced across the navigation controls. My father said dragons evolved in three-dimensional environments, flying through mountain ranges and canyon systems. Maybe that's why we're natural navigators. The nebula loomed ahead, a vast cloud of purple and crimson gas lit from within by newborn stars. Beautiful and deadly, it played havoc with sensors and communications. Ships that entered without skilled pilots often never came out, lost in the maze of radiation and gravitational eddies. Switching to manual control, David said, disabling the automated navigation. In the Veil, you flew by instinct and experience, not computer calculations. Kira called out course corrections while David piloted, the two of them falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite having worked together for less than a week. The ship slipped into the nebula's outer layers, and immediately their sensors began reporting errors and ghost contacts. Coordinates from Orthan's chip are loaded, Kira said. Bearing 270, distance approximately 40,000 kilometers. David adjusted their heading. The Wandering Star glided through clouds of ionized gas that painted the cockpit windows in shifting colors. Navigation markers appeared and disappeared as interference washed over their instruments. This was flying at its most primitive, relying on visual confirmation and dead reckoning point 2 hours into the nebula. They found the debris field. Twisted metal hung in space like a sculpture of violence. Pieces of ships that had been torn apart by weapons designed to kill efficiently. David decreased their speed to a crawl, weaving between the larger chunks. I'm reading multiple hull signatures, Kira said, her voice tight. 2 confirmed as convoy ships. 1 is the Meridian Light. David's hands tightened on the controls. Can you locate the life pod signatures Ordhan mentioned? Kira worked the sensors, compensating for interference with manual adjustments. I've got something. Faint power readings, bearing 335. They're in low power mode, just like Ordhan said. They maneuvered closer, and David activated the external lights. 3 life pods floated in a cluster, their hull plating scorched but intact. Emergency beacons pulsed weakly, having broadcast for 3 years into the void with no one listening. Suiting up, David said, already moving toward the airlock. You monitor from here and keep the ship ready to move if anything shows up on sensors. Be careful, Kira said. David cycled through the airlock and activated his maneuvering thrusters, floating across the gap to the nearest pod. Through the small viewport, he could see the interior was empty, its emergency supplies long since exhausted. The second pod showed the same result, but the third pod had something different. A jacket, worn and stained, floating in the zero gravity. David recognized the style immediately. A pilot's flight jacket, the kind issued to commercial freight crews. He maneuvered closer to read the name patch. Commander Tavis, his heart rate spiked. The pod had been used recently enough that the jacket still showed signs of wear. But where was the occupant? David checked the pod's minimal computer logs, finding the last entry dated 3 months after the Veil incident. Someone had survived in this pod for 3 months, then the logs stopped. David. Kira's voice came through his helmet speakers, urgent and afraid. Sensors are showing a contact. Ship-sized, approaching fast from bearing 180. David spun around, his suit thrusters firing automatically. Through the nebula's swirling gases, he could see running lights approaching. A sleek vessel, too clean and too fast to be a random salvage ship. Corporate security. Get back to the ship, now, Kira said. David grabbed the flight jacket and kicked off from the pod, his thrusters at maximum burn. The Wandering Star's airlock gaped open ahead of him, and he could see Kira in the cockpit. Already bringing the engines online, he hit the airlock at speed, tumbling inside as the outer door slammed shut. Before the pressure finished equalizing, he was on the internal comms. Get us out of here. The ship lurched as Kira fired the main engines, diving deeper into the debris field. The corporate vessel followed, and David saw weapons ports opening along its hull. They were in serious trouble, and the hunt had just begun. Plasma fire lit up the nebula like lightning strikes in a storm. David threw himself into the pilot's seat as the first shot screamed past the Wandering Star's hull, close enough that proximity alarm shrieked warnings through the cockpit. Hard aport dropped 30 degrees. He barked, and Kira's claws flew across the navigation console, feeding him the angles he needed to thread between 2 massive chunks of debris. The corporate ship followed, its pilot skilled but cautious. David used that caution against them, diving toward a dense cluster of wreckage that would tear apart a larger vessel. The Wandering Star was small enough and maneuverable enough to slip through gaps that the corporate ship had to avoid. They're trying to force us toward the nebula's center, Kira said, reading the tactical situation with frightening clarity. There's a gravity anomaly there. If we get too close, we won't have enough power to escape the pull. I know. We're not going to the center. David pulled up hard, using a piece of hull plating the size of a building as cover. How long until we can jump to hyperspace? Jump drive needs 8 minutes to charge in this interference. We got 3 minutes done. 5 minutes. They had to survive for 5 more minutes while a ship with superior weapons and sensors hunted them through the debris field. David's military training kicked in, analyzing options and discarding bad ones in rapid succession. Running wouldn't work. Fighting would be suicide. That left option 3. I'm sending a data burst on all frequencies, he said, pulling up the evidence they'd gathered. The data chip from Ordhan, the pod logs, the weapons signatures from the debris, everything compressed into a single transmission. If we're going down, everyone's going to know what Orin Holdings did here. Wait, Kira said, her claws hovering over the communications panel. If we broadcast now, they'll jam it immediately. But if we encrypt it and set it to broadcast continuously on a delay, it'll keep transmitting even after they destroy us or jam our main systems. David stared at her. That was a combat tactic he'd learned in advanced military communications school. Where did you learn that? I don't know. It just seemed obvious. Kira was already implementing the solution, her young face set with concentration. Encrypting now with a commercial shipping code. Anyone monitoring freight channels will pick it up eventually. The corporate ship emerged from behind a twisted girder, weapons hot. David threw the wandering star into a spin, vectoring thrust in 3 directions at once to create an unpredictable flight path. Plasma rounds carved through space where they'd been seconds before. For minutes to jump, Kira said, remarkably calm for someone experiencing combat for the first time. David dove toward a cluster of smaller debris, using the wandering star's superior maneuverability to weave between obstacles. His hands moved across the controls with muscle memory from 1,000 training runs. But this wasn't a simulation. If he miscalculated by even a meter, they'd slam into wreckage at killing speed. The corporate ship fired again, and this time the plasma round clipped their port stabilizer. Alarms screamed as the ship lurched, and David fought to maintain control while damage reports flooded his screens. Stabilizer at 40%, Kira reported. We can still maneuver, but not as precisely. A voice cut through the comm static, cold and professional. Unidentified freighter. Cease your engines and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. David didn't bother responding. He knew what boarding meant. They'd seize the evidence, probably kill him and Kira, and dump their bodies in the nebula where they'd never be found. Just like they'd done to the convoy 3 years ago. Jump drive at 70%, Kira said. The corporate ship fired a spread of shots, forcing David into a series of evasive maneuvers that ate up their momentum. They were slowing down, becoming an easier target. He needed to change the equation, needed to give them an advantage. Then he saw it. A massive piece of wreckage ahead, rotating slowly in the nebula's gravitational currents. It was the broken forward section of a cargo hauler, its hull split open to reveal internal compartments and equipment bays. Can you calculate that wreck's rotation speed and plot us a course through it? David asked. Kira's eyes widened as she understood what he was planning. The gap is only 15 meters wider than our ship, and it's rotating. If I get the timing wrong by even a second, we'll hit the edges. Can you do it? She took a breath, her claws dancing across the navigation console. Numbers and trajectory lines filled the screen, updating in real time as she compensated for the wreck's rotation and their own velocity. I can do it. On your mark. David angled toward the rotating wreck, building up speed. The corporate ship followed, sensing they were making a desperate move. Behind them, weapons charged for a killing shot. 3 seconds, Kira said. 2, 1, mark. David fired the main engines at full burn, shooting toward the rotating gap. The wandering star entered the wreckage tunnel at exactly the angle Kira had calculated, threading through the 15-meter clearance with less than a meter to spare on either side. Metal screamed as their damaged stabilizer scraped against the wreck's interior, but they made it through. The corporate ship tried to follow, but they'd started their approach too late. They pulled up hard, aborting the maneuver rather than risk a collision. By the time they'd circled around the wreck, the wandering star had gained precious distance. Jump drive at 90%, Kira said. Plasma fire resumed, but the corporate ship was firing at extreme range now, their shots going wild in the nebula's interference. David kept the wandering star moving unpredictably, burning fuel he couldn't afford to waste, but knowing it was the only thing keeping them alive. 100%. Jump drive ready. Engage, David said. The universe twisted. Space folded in ways that human eyes weren't meant to perceive, and the wandering star leaped across light years in an instant. When reality reasserted itself, they were in the black emptiness between star systems, with no contacts on sensors and blessed silence replacing the shriek of combat alarms. David slumped in his seat, adrenaline draining from his system and leaving him shaking. Beside him, Kira sat very still, her claws gripping the edge of the console hard enough to leave marks in the metal. "We made it," she whispered. "We made it," David confirmed. He checked their systems, finding damage, but nothing immediately fatal. The encrypted broadcast was still transmitting, bouncing through freight relay stations across the sector. Within hours, it would reach news networks, independent investigators, and authorities who couldn't be bought or silenced. But David's attention kept returning to the flight jacket he'd retrieved from the life pod, now secure in the cargo bay. He accessed the pod's complete logs, reading through 3 months of increasingly desperate entries. Commander Tavis had survived the initial attack. He'd managed to deploy several life pods, including one carrying his daughter. Then he'd piloted his dying ship away from the pods, drawing the corporate security forces after him. His last log entry, dated 93 days after the Veil incident, reported his oxygen supplies nearly exhausted and his ship's power failing. But there was something else in the logs. A set of coordinates, updated daily, showing drift patterns and gravitational calculations. Commander Tavis had been tracking where the life pods would drift, where the nebula's currents would carry them over months and years. David plotted those coordinates on his navigation system and felt his breath catch. One set of calculations showed a pod drifting toward a mining station on the nebula's far edge, a station operated by an independent collective that didn't answer to corporations. "Kira," he said carefully, "I found something in your father's logs." She looked up, hope and fear warring in her golden eyes. "Your father tracked the life pod trajectories. He calculated that at least one pod would drift within rescue range of an independent station." David showed her the data. That was 3 years ago. If someone from that station found the pod and rescued survivors, they might still be there. "My mother." Kira's voice was barely audible. "Maybe. There's a chance, a real chance, that she survived." David pulled up star charts. "The station is called Haven's Rest. It's 3 days from our current position." Kira stared at the data, her whole body trembling. She'd been alone for so long, an orphan scraping by in the dark corners of Port Havel. And now, suddenly, impossibly, there might be a thread of hope leading to family she'd thought lost forever. "Can we go there?" she asked. David set the course without hesitation. "We're already on our way." Behind them, across the vast network of communication relays, the encrypted broadcast continued spreading. Evidence of corporate murder, of conspiracy and cover-up, radiating outward like ripples from a stone thrown into a pond. Somewhere, people were starting to ask questions that Orin Holdings would have preferred stayed buried. But David wasn't thinking about corporate conspiracies or legal consequences. He was thinking about a dragon hatchling who'd been brave enough to trust a stranger, and about the possibility that her courage might lead them both to something worth finding. The wandering star sailed through the darkness, carrying its small crew toward an uncertain future and a fragile hope of reunion. Haven's Rest looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and stubborn determination. The mining station clung to an asteroid on the nebula's edge, its modules connected by tubes that seemed too fragile for the vacuum of space. Solar panels jutted out at odd angles, and the docking ring showed signs of repairs done with whatever materials were available. David brought the wandering star in slowly, sending identification codes and a request to dock. The response came back in a weathered voice that sounded like it had seen too many disappointments to get excited about anything. "Wandering Star, you're cleared for Dock 7. Be advised, we're an independent collective, no corporate affiliations, and we don't ask questions if you don't volunteer trouble." "Understood. Haven's Rest. We're not here to cause problems." The docking clamps secured their ship with a clang that reverberated through the hull. David and Kira suited up, though the station's atmosphere readings showed as stable. In places like this, you learn to trust your equipment more than sensors. The station's interior matched its exterior, functional but worn. They made their way through corridors lined with exposed pipes and jury-rigged electrical systems. A few workers passed them, offering nods but no conversation. Privacy was currency in independent stations, and strangers who respected that were welcome to their business. The station administrator met them in a small office that doubled as a storage room. She was human, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes that evaluated them with professional thoroughness. "I am Administrator Wilson. You folks looking for work, supplies, or trouble?" "Information," David said. "About 3 years ago, this station might have picked up a life pod that drifted from the Veil Nebula. We're trying to track down survivors from convoy attack." Wilson's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Why would you think we picked up anyone?" "Because trajectory calculations show the pod would have drifted into your patrol range. And because this station is the kind of place that helps people without asking too many questions." David met her gaze steadily. We're not corporate. We're not law enforcement. We're just trying to find someone who might still be alive. Wilson studied them for a long moment, her attention lingering on Kira. Your dragon, like the one we found. Kira stepped forward, hope making her voice shake. Please. My mother was in one of those pods. Her name is Ceratavis. She has amber scales like mine and a mark on her left wing that looks like a lightning bolt. The administrator's professional mask cracked slightly. Wait here. She left them in the office, and David could hear Kira's breathing getting faster and shallower. He put a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension in her small frame. Easy. Don't hope too hard until we know for certain. I can't help it, Kira whispered. What if she's really here? What if I've been alone all this time and she was alive? Wilson returned 10 minutes later with another figure following her. A dragon, female, with amber scales that had lost some of their luster from injury and recovery. She walked slowly, one wing held at an odd angle that suggested permanent damage. When she saw Kira, she froze. Kia. The voice was uncertain, like someone afraid to believe what they were seeing. Kira made a sound that was half sob, half gasp, and then they were moving toward each other. Mother and daughter met in the middle of the small office, wings wrapping around each other, and David had to look away from the raw emotion in that reunion. Administrator Wilson gestured for David to follow her into the corridor, giving them privacy. We found her pod about 2 months after the Veil incident. She was in bad shape, barely conscious, suffering from oxygen deprivation and exposure. Our medical team worked on her for weeks. Memory loss, David guessed. Severe. She couldn't remember her name, where she came from, anything about her life before. We've been helping her recover, but the neural damage was extensive. She works in our hydroponics bay now, growing food for the station. Seems to calm her. Through the office window, David could see Kira talking rapidly while her mother listened with an expression of growing wonder and pain. Memories were starting to surface, triggered by her daughter's presence. The broadcast you sent, Wilson said quietly. We received it 6 hours ago. Corporate murder. Evidence of conspiracy. That's why they attacked the convoy. They were carrying witnesses to illegal mining operations. Orin Holdings staged a pirate attack to eliminate everyone who knew about their crimes. David pulled out the data chip Ordon had given him. This has the complete evidence. Sensor logs, weapons, signatures, everything. What do you plan to do with it? I've already sent it to every major news network in the sector. By now, Galactic authorities are opening investigations. Orin Holdings is about to have a very bad quarter. David looked through the window at Kira and her mother. But mostly I'm going to make sure this family gets the chance to rebuild what was taken from them. Wilson nodded slowly. Haven's Rest doesn't turn away people who need sanctuary. Sarah can stay here as long as she wants, and her daughter is welcome too. Thank you, but I think they might want to stay with me, at least for a while. On a cargo freighter, it's not much, but it's home. And sometimes family isn't about blood or species. It's about who stands with you when things get dark. They returned to the office to find Kira showing her mother the photograph of Commander Tavis. Sarah held it with trembling claws, tears streaming down her scaled face. I remember him, she said. Not everything, not yet, but I remember his voice. The way he used to sing old flight songs. The way he called me his brightest star. She looked at Kira. And I remember you, little flame. I remember holding you when you were just hatched, so small and perfect. Kira pressed against her mother, and they stayed like that for a long time. 6 months passed. The scandal surrounding Orin Holdings destroyed the company, with executives arrested and assets frozen pending criminal trials. The Veil incident became a rallying cry for corporate accountability, and new regulations were written to prevent similar cover-ups. David's role in exposing the conspiracy made him briefly famous, which he hated, and then quickly forgotten, which he preferred. The Wandering Star continued running cargo routes, but now with an expanded crew. Sarah had chosen to leave Haven's Rest and join David's ship. Her memories had returned gradually, and with them came the determination to honor her husband's sacrifice by living fully and helping others. She worked as a navigator and systems specialist, her natural dragon instincts combining with recovered professional training to make her invaluable. Kira studied relentlessly, devouring everything David could teach her about piloting and ship operations. She wore her father's flight jacket whenever they made difficult runs, and David had seen her talking to the photograph sometimes, telling Commander Tavis about her achievements. The Wandering Stars cargo runs changed focus. David started taking contracts that helped Dragon refugees relocate safely, using his network of contacts to find them homes and opportunities far from corporate exploitation. Word spread through the Dragon communities, and slowly, the walls of isolation began to come down on a clear day in space. With the ship running smoothly and the stars spread out before them like diamonds on black velvet, David stood on the bridge with Kira beside him. She was taller now, healthier, her scales gleaming with proper nutrition and care. The broken horn had been fitted with a prosthetic that she wore with pride. "I want to learn advanced combat piloting," she announced. "Like you flew in the military." "Why?" "Because there are other people like us out there. People who need someone to stand up for them. Someone who won't back down when corporations or pirates or anyone else tries to hurt them." Kira looked up at him with those golden eyes that had seen too much pain but had somehow kept their hope. "My father protected people by flying cargo to colonies. You protected people by serving in the military. I want to protect people too." David felt pride swell in his chest. "It's dangerous work. I know, but you'll teach me, won't you? You'll show me how to be brave like my father was, like you are." "I'm not that brave, Kira. I'm just stubborn." She smiled, showing the confidence of someone who'd survived the worst and come out stronger. "Then teach me to be stubborn too." That evening, after Kira had gone to her cabin to study navigation charts, Sarah joined David in the galley. She poured herself a cup of the tea she'd introduced to the ship's supplies, herbs grown in her hydroponics experiments. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finding her, for protecting her, for giving us both a home. You don't need to thank me. Your crew. That means we take care of each other. Still, what you did, taking in a homeless hatchling and risking everything to uncover the truth, that's not something most humans would do." David thought about that. "Maybe, but I've served with enough non-humans to know that courage and decency aren't limited to any one species. Your husband proved that when he sacrificed himself to save others. Kira proved it when she trusted a stranger. You proved it by recovering from trauma and choosing to help others instead of hiding." He gestured around the small galley, where the photograph of Commander Tavis now hung beside a new picture of David, Kira, and Sarah standing together in front of the Wandering Star. "This ship isn't much, but it's become something I never expected. A family." Sarah touched the photograph gently. "My husband would have liked you, Captain Reed. He always said the measure of a person wasn't their species or their wealth or their power. It was what they did when no one was watching and nothing forced them to act except their own conscience." David raised his cold coffee in a toast. "To Commander Tavis. To brave pilots and the families they protect." "To family," Sarah echoed, clinking her cup against his. "Found and chosen and cherished." Outside the ship, the galaxy turned in its eternal dance. Somewhere, other lost souls drifted in the dark, waiting for rescue. Other injustices lurked in corporate shadows, waiting to be exposed. Other families struggled to survive in places where help seemed impossible. But aboard the Wandering Star, a human captain, a dragon navigator, and a dragon hatchling who dreamed of flying ships like her father sailed on together. They carried cargo, they carried hope, and they carried the unshakable belief that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to leave people behind. The story of a homeless dragon, hatchling who saw a ship and remembered her father, had become something bigger. It had become a story about loyalty that crossed species lines, about justice pursued despite danger, and about the simple truth that family is built not by blood but by choice and courage. And in the cold vastness of space, that story was just beginning.